The wind carried the dry, acrid smell of dust and death across the prairie, scraping against Amos Redbird's fever-slicked skin as he knelt beneath the twisted branches of the old blackjack oak. His hands trembled as he pressed the folded letter into his daughter's small, calloused palm. The parchment, creased and sweat-stained, held the last words he could offer this world. Talia stared at him, her dark eyes sharp, too old for 7. She didn't cry. That was the part that broke him. Behind her, Ayesha whimpered and leaned into her sister's side, her cheeks flushed with heat. The 5-year-old had barely spoken since morning, her thin body draped in the yellow calico dress their mother had sewn 2 summers ago, now faded and hanging off her like a rag. Her curls were matted with sweat. Her small hand clutched the ragged hem of Talia's skirt like it was the only thread holding her to the earth. Amos swallowed hard, the inside of his throat raw with sickness. "Someone good will come," he whispered, voice dry as the wind scratching through brittle grass. "Just wait here, by the tree. Hold on to each other, and give them the letter." Talia didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around the paper. He looked into her face, the high cheeks like her mother's, the square chin like his own. He had nothing left to give her. No bread, no shelter, no name that would carry weight in a world that never looked kindly on Redbird blood. Only this last desperate act that clawed at every corner of his soul. This terrible choice to leave them. "I'll find you," he said, knowing he wouldn't. Ayesha coughed, a dry, rattling sound that made his gut twist. He reached out, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered but didn't focus. Too hot. Too tired. She needed water, a cool cloth, shade, someone better than him. Talia looked up at him again. Her lips parted, but the words never came. They didn't need to. She knew. She had known for weeks. She'd watched his weight drop, watched the cough steal his breath. She'd started rationing the cornmeal herself. She'd given Ayesha the bigger share. She was her mother's child through and through. All quiet watchfulness and silent resolve. And now she was being asked to do the impossible, be strong without anyone left to catch her if she broke. Amos stood staggering slightly, gripping the tree trunk for balance. His legs were weak, soaked in fire and fever. He hadn't slept more than an hour the night before. The shakes had come again, then the blood bright red in his handkerchief, like the sky before a storm. He looked down one last time. The girls sat on a scrap of quilt, the food sack between them, the canteen half full. The blackjack oak stretched above them, its branches low and wide. A good tree, visible from the road, shelter from the sun, the crossroads a few hundred yards away. People passed through there, wagons, ranch hands, traders. Someone would come. They had to. "Don't lose that letter," he said again, softer now. "And don't leave this tree." Talia gave a single nod. "I won't." He turned. The wind cut into him like a blade. Papa Ayesha's voice was barely more than a breath. He couldn't look back. If he did, he'd never keep walking. "I love you," he said, and it cracked something deep inside. "Both of you, more than anything." Then he walked. One step, another. The earth seemed to tilt with every movement. He kept his eyes on the horizon where the red line of the prairie met the endless, blistering sky. Sweat soaked his collar. The fever roared in his ears like river water in spring. Behind him, the girls didn't call out again. Ayesha might have. Talia wouldn't let her. She'd hold her, distract her. She knew what was happening. She knew it had to be done. 50 yards. He dared a glance over his shoulder. They were small now, 2 specks of color under the sprawling oak. Talia with her back straight, Ayesha curled into her side, the canteen beside them. the sack of bread and apples. He turned forward again, and the wind blew hot against his face, stealing the last of his strength. Back at the soddy, he wrapped the last of his belongings in a handkerchief. His father's pocket watched the silver button from his wedding vest, Mary's wedding ring. Nothing that could feed a child. Nothing that could fix lungs turned to rot. He latched the door behind him and started east toward the rail line. Every step was a punishment. Every breath a reminder. But not as cruel as watching his daughters wither beside him. Not as cruel as listening to their stomachs growl at night while he coughed blood into the dark. Not as cruel as knowing they'd die slow, hollow deaths unless he left them. He wasn't praying for forgiveness. He didn't expect any. He was praying for someone to ride by. Someone good. Someone better than him. Under the shade of the oak, Talia didn't speak. She pressed her hand against Ayesha's forehead. Still hot. Still burning. The letter crinkled in her fist. Her throat ached from holding everything in. She turned her face to the road and watched. And waited. He promised someone good would come, but the sun's going down, and I think the promise is going with it. Talia whispered the words like a confession, not really meaning for Ayesha to hear them. But her sister stirred against her lap, eyes flickering open with a dry, restless whimper. "It's hot," Ayesha mumbled, her breath shallow, her voice sticky. "My belly hurts." Talia brushed a strand of hair from her sister's face. Ayesha's skin was too warm for sitting out under the open sky, with nothing but a threadbare quilt between them and the sun-baked earth. She opened the canteen and tilted it gently to her sister's mouth. Ayesha took a few sips, coughed, then turned her face into Talia's skirt. "Papa said someone would come," she murmured. When Talia looked toward the dusty trail stretching in both directions, like a ribbon laid across the bones of the land. The sun sat high still, but the heat had only grown heavier since morning. The oak tree shaded them some, but even the bark of the trunk was hot to the touch now. Nothing moved on the horizon, no wagons, no riders, not even a stray jackrabbit. Only the wind hissing through the brown grass. She didn't answer, because she didn't know. Hours had passed since their father had walked away. Talia had watched his form shimmer into the prairie heat until he disappeared. Not like a man stepping into the distance. More like a stone sinking into water, leaving nothing behind but the ripple of grief. Ayesha whimpered again. Talia tore a piece of bread from the small loaf and pressed it into her sister's hand. "Eat this slow, okay, small bites. I'm not hungry," Ayesha said, but took it anyway. She chewed listlessly. Talia's own stomach gnawed at her, but she ignored it. The sun had crept across the sky, sliding shadows down the trunk of the oak, reminding her how time passed without kindness. Her thoughts kept circling. What if no one came? What if Papa was wrong? What if he never meant to come back at all? No. That wasn't fair. He hadn't wanted to leave. She saw it in his eyes. He was sick, dying, and even then he'd tied Ayesha's ribbon with shaking fingers. He'd tried to smile. He'd said he'd find them. The words had cracked in his mouth like glass, but saying it didn't make it true. A hawk cried somewhere above. The sound was sharp, distant. The kind of sound that made Talia think of big skies and empty fields, things too wide to understand. She shifted against the tree, trying not to wince, as the heat soaked through the quilt and into her legs. Ayesha had fallen asleep again, her face slack and glistening with sweat. Talia dabbed her forehead with the hem of her dress. The canteen was nearly half gone already. She knew they had to make it last. But what if the fever got worse? What if Ayesha needed more? She looked again at the road. Still nothing. Her heart beat louder in the stillness. She remembered what Mama used to say. Time's a slow horse when you're waiting, baby girl. Just keep rocking in the saddle. But Mama had said that while braiding her hair or shelling peas on the porch, not while her youngest lay burning up under a dying tree. The wind shifted. For a second she thought she heard hoofbeats, real ones not imagined. Her head snapped up, her breath caught in her throat. But the trail lay empty. The sound faded, replaced by the creak of branches and the hush of grass rubbing against itself. Her shoulders sagged. She tried to distract herself to stay busy. She checked the food sack again, 2 apples, the rest of the bread, the canteen. Not much. Maybe enough for one more day if they stretched it. She thought about cutting the apple into pieces, but Ayasha couldn't keep much down. Maybe later. "Tell me a story," came a thin voice. Talia looked down. Ayasha's eyes were open, glassy, and confused. She blinked slowly. "About Mama?" she asked. Talia swallowed. Her chest ached in that way it did when too many feelings pushed in at once. But she nodded. "Okay." She began softly, her voice a little hoarse. "Mama grew up near a river real wide and blue. She had a garden full of flowers and one big apple tree that bent over her window. She used to climb it and drop green apples on her brothers' heads." Ayasha smiled faintly. She said in the spring it smelled like honey and lilacs all the way to the creek. And in fall they made cider and laughed so hard the air shook with it. Talia kept going, letting the rhythm of her voice soothe them both. She told stories Mama had told her about learning to bake bread in a smoky kitchen, about singing during rainstorms, about loving their papa long before he wore worry in his face. Eventually, Ayasha's breathing steadied again, and she drifted off. Talia didn't stop watching the road. The sun began to lean westward, taking its heat with it, but leaving behind the sharp, itchy residue of a long day's burn. Her arms were sun-pink, her lips dry. She rubbed them with the back of her hand and took a cautious sip from the canteen. The light changed gold, now longer shadows. The air had a hum to it, like the land was holding its breath. Then came the buzzing dread in her stomach. What if night came and no one found them? What if they stayed here all night? She'd heard stories, coyotes, snakes, men who didn't stop for crying children, men who did. She curled tighter around Ayasha. A cloud of dust stirred on the horizon. She blinked, heart hammering. It grew, a blur, a shape, horse and rider. Her mouth went dry. She didn't dare speak, didn't even nudge Ayasha awake. She just held her sister close and clutched the letter to her chest. The rider grew clearer in the golden light. A man tall in the saddle hat pulled low horse, steady and sure. Talia's heart beat so loud she could hardly hear the wind anymore. She didn't know yet whether he'd stop or whether she'd need to run. Sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you you're still human. Dust curled around the hooves of the approaching horse, slow and steady, like the rider didn't believe in rushing anything, not even into the unknown. Talia squinted against the setting sun, her heart thundering in her chest. Her arms tightened around Ayasha, who still lay fevered in her lap. The man reined in about 20 feet away. He didn't speak right away, just sat there tall and still, letting his gaze sweep the scene, the 2 girls beneath the leaning oak, the old quilt spread beneath them, the nearly empty canteen, the torn loaf of bread. His horse shifted under him, restless, as if even the animal could feel the tension in the air. Talia's throat tightened. She held up her chin as Mama used to when things got hard. "She's sick," she said, voice rough, "and we're out of water." The man dismounted in one smooth motion, boots crunching over sun-baked dirt. He wore a long duster that had seen its share of wind and trail, and his hat shadowed his face, but not enough to hide the sharp line of his jaw or the quiet calculation in his eyes. His skin was the rich bronze of the Diné people, his black braid dusted with sand, his presence quiet, measured, commanding. He crouched down, slow, not too close, like a man used to approaching wounded animals or broken people. "You girls alone." His voice was low, but it carried. Talia nodded stiffly. "Papa left us. Said he'd send help. He's sick." The man didn't flinch. His gaze dropped to Ayasha, then to the letter clutched in Talia's hand. "May I read that?" Talia hesitated, then passed it over her fingers, brushing his calloused ones. He read it silently, lips pressed into a line, then folded it again, with care tucking it into his coat pocket, like it mattered. "My name's Cale Blackhorse," he said. "I've got water and medicine in my saddlebag. Can I look at her?" Talia's eyes welled up, but she blinked hard. She moved back just enough for him to kneel beside Ayasha, who whimpered in her fever sleep. Kali uncorked a leather flask and dribbled cool water into her mouth, then checked her pulse, her skin, the whites of her eyes. "She's burning up," he muttered. "You did good keeping her in the shade." He pulled a pouch from his saddlebag, mixed a pinch of something into a little water, and coaxed it between Ayasha's lips. "What's that?" Talia asked. "Willow bark and golden seal. Fever powder. Not perfect, but it'll bring her down until we can get her to town." He looked up, his eyes catching hers. "You got any folks?" Talia shook her head. "Mama passed last winter. No kin close, just us and Papa." Cale didn't answer right away. He took a long breath, then stood. "All right," he said. "I can take you to my ranch. It's half a day's ride west past the foothills. Got a housekeeper, Miss Hattie, she'll know what to do. And Doc Warren lives near." Talia bit her lip. "You're not gonna leave us?" "No, ma'am," Cale said. "I don't leave folks behind." He said it with such quiet certainty that Talia's chest cracked open a little. She didn't even realize she'd started crying until his hand passed her a clean handkerchief folded neat. Cale bundled Ayasha, carefully wrapping her in a wool blanket from his saddlebag, then lifted her with surprising gentleness. She stirred, moaning, but settled against his shoulder. Talia gathered their few things, the canteen, the bread, the ribbon Papa had tied, and followed. Cale boosted her up onto his horse, first settling her behind the saddle, then climbed up with Ayasha, cradled in one arm. It felt strange sharing a saddle with a stranger, but his horse was steady, and his presence wasn't frightening. It was solid, like old roots under shifting ground. They rode in silence as the sun dipped low, bleeding color across the sky. The prairie rolled out in waves of gold and shadow cicadas humming in the brush. Talia leaned into Cale's back, one arm holding onto the saddle horn, the other around Ayasha, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. Every so often, Cale spoke, telling her what hills they passed, where the land shifted. He spoke of the river fork that marked the edge of his land, of the way the elk used to come down from the mountain in spring. His voice was rough, but not unkind. She imagined he didn't talk much, but now he was making an effort, like he knew it mattered. They crested a ridge as dusk deepened, and Talia gasped. Below, nestled in a shallow valley surrounded by cottonwoods, sat a ranch house with wide porches and warm lights glowing in the windows. A barn and 2 outbuildings sat nearby, and a fenced garden full of tall corn waved gently in the wind. "It's real big," she whispered. "Built it up myself," Cale said. "Started with a cabin, added on over time. Just you mostly. Had help. Hired good hands. They're off to the cattle camp now." He didn't say more, and she didn't ask. They rode up to the porch where an older woman stood with hands on her hips, her silver hair braided tight, her blue dress covered in flour. "Cale Blackhorse, what in heaven's name, Miss Hattie?" he said, as he dismounted, still cradling Ayasha. "We've got sick little ones and a long story. Need your help." Miss Hattie took one look at Ayasha, and her whole face changed. "Inside. Now. Spare room's clean. I'll fetch a basin and linens." Talia scrambled down as Miss Hattie vanished inside, returning with a whirlwind of purpose. The house smelled of bread and rosemary and wood smoke, and the warmth of it nearly buckled Talia's knees. Cale laid Ayasha on the bed, and Miss Hattie got to work cooling her skin with wet cloths, humming low under her breath. "Don't you worry," she said to Talia. "We'll get her right." Talia stood frozen in the doorway, arms limp, unsure what to do with herself in this strange, warm world. Cale touched her shoulder gently. "You're safe now." It was the first time she'd heard that word, and believed it. She sat down in the corner where she could watch Ayasha breathe, and she stayed that way until her own eyes closed without asking. In the quiet dark, Miss Hattie whispered to Cale, "You bringing home stray girls now." "They're not strays," he answered. "They're ours now." Outside, the wind picked up. The smell of coming rain drifted over the hills. "My sister's not just sick, she's scared to close her eyes now." The storm rolled in fast the next morning, just as Miss Hattie was warming biscuits on the stove, and Ayasha managed her first few sips of broth. Thunder grumbled over the hills, and the sky turned a heavy slate gray, pressing down on the ranch like a warning. Cale had already headed out to check the fences near the west pasture, leaving Talia by the window, watching with worry etched across her young face. Ayasha lay curled in bed, her cheeks flushed, but not burning like before. She blinked at the curtains, clearly awake now, and her fingers trembled when she reached for Talia. "I saw him," she whispered. "In my sleep. Papa." Talia sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her sister's damp curls off her forehead. "It was just a dream, Shima." "He's not here. He was mad. He said we was trouble. He said he should have left us sooner." The words lanced through Talia like a blade. "Don't listen to dreams. You're safe now. You hear me? This place, this house, it's real." Ayasha didn't respond, but her hand clutched Talia's tighter, the bruises on her arms still fading from whatever had happened those last nights with Papa. Talia had never dared ask what their father had said or done to Ayasha when she wasn't looking. The girl had come back changed. The front door opened with a gust of wind, and Cale stepped in, soaked to the bone, removing his hat as he kicked the mud from his boots. "Storm's gonna sit here a day or two," he said, voice steady. "Fence line's holding, but I'll need to check the upper trail after it passes." Miss Hattie handed him a towel and a mug of chicory coffee. "You'll catch your death riding out in this. Storm won't wait on comfort." Cal replied, but took the towel anyway, drying his hands. His eyes drifted to Talia and Ayasha. "How's the little one?" "She's better," Talia said. "Still real tired." Cale nodded. "You did good bringing her this far." Miss Hattie came in with a folded blanket and sat beside Ayasha, rubbing salve onto the child's thin wrists. "Storms spook more than cattle. They bring out ghosts. Best thing now is rest." But Ayasha didn't rest. She flinched every time thunder cracked. She whimpered in her sleep, even with Miss Hattie humming old lullabies under her breath. And as night fell, her fever edged back up, not blazing, but insistent, like something was digging into her spirit and not letting go. After dinner, Talia wandered into the hallway, watching the rain streak the windows. Cale was nearby, sharpening a small knife with even strokes, seated at the edge of the hearth. "She's scared to sleep," Talia murmured. Cale looked up. Because of him, Talia nodded slowly. "I think he did things to her. Things I didn't see." He set down the knife. You don't need to explain. Talia wrapped her arms around herself. I don't understand how a man can just give up on his own blood. Cale's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted like a window had opened inside him. You'd be surprised what people are capable of when they get empty inside, when they lose their way. Did you ever lose someone? She asked quietly. Cale leaned back, fingers steepled. I lost a brother to the snow, a mother to the whiskey, and a part of myself to war. You don't forget pain, Talia. But you do get to decide what kind of person it makes you. That stayed with her long after she climbed into bed in the small room Miss Hattie had made up for her, long after the oil lamp flickered out and the wind howled against the roof. In the middle of the night, Ayasha screamed. Talia bolted upright and ran to her sister's room, nearly colliding with Miss Hattie in the hall. Cale was already there, standing near the doorway, jaw tight. Ayasha was thrashing, caught in the grip of something fierce. Her face was pale with terror, hands clawing at the air. No, Papa, no, I didn't do nothing wrong. Please, Talia rushed to the bed, grabbing her sister's shoulders gently. Shh, it's me, it's Talia. You're safe, you're safe. Ayasha blinked hard, panting, her eyes wild with fear before they finally focused. I thought he was here. I could hear his voice. Miss Hattie moved fast, bringing warm water and a cloth to calm her. Dreams can be cruel, she whispered. But they pass, child. They always pass. Cale stood back quiet, watching the way Ayasha clung to her sister like an anchor. Do you want me to sit with you? He asked softly. Ayasha hesitated, then gave a timid nod. He crossed the room slowly and sat on the chair by the bed, his large hands resting on his knees. Want to know something strange, he said. When I was a boy about your age, I used to get scared at night. I'd hear things, wolves whined, voices that weren't there. Ayasha looked at him curious, despite herself. My mother, before she got sick, told me when the wind howls like that, it's not something bad. It's just the old spirits reminding us we're still alive, that we can still feel. He smiled a little. You're strong, Ayasha, and that means something. The girl didn't smile back, but she didn't look away either. She lay back down, eyes watching him until they finally fluttered shut. When Miss Hattie and Talia stepped into the hallway again, the older woman let out a sigh. That man has a way with broken things. Talia didn't respond. Her throat was tight. She stood there, hand on the doorframe, listening to the soft murmur of Cale's voice, telling Ayasha stories of wild horses and stars that never burned out. In the days that followed, the rain softened and the land began to breathe again. Ayasha improved in small ways, longer naps, without screams, a better appetite. The first hint of laughter at a joke Miss Hattie made about chicken soup and cowboys who couldn't cook. Still, she rarely left Talia's side, and the fear in her eyes hadn't completely lifted. That morning, as they all sat on the porch watching steam rise off the soaked earth, Cale turned to Talia. I've got a neighbor up north, goes by Doc Warren. He's not just a doctor. He knows how to talk with children who've been through hard things. I'd like to take Ayasha to see him. Talia stiffened. She don't trust anyone yet. I know. But trust starts with us showing her people can be different. Ayasha came up behind them, fingers tucked in Talia's skirt. Will you come too? She asked Cale. I wouldn't let you go alone, he said. She nodded, slow but sure. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but at least now they weren't walking it alone. The man who hurt you doesn't get to decide who you become. The old buckboard rattled down the trail, its wheels splashing through shallow puddles left behind by the storm. Cale guided the reins loosely in his hands, while Ayasha sat between him and Talia, her small fingers wrapped around her sister's hand so tightly it had turned pale. The wide sky had cleared overnight, now a wash of bright blue with the sun shining sharp and cold, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and pine. Ayesha hadn't said a word since they'd left the ranch. Talia glanced down at her heart clenched. The girl's shoulders were tense, and though her eyes stayed open, she wasn't really looking, just staring ahead, like something might leap from the trees. Cale noticed too. "We'll take it slow," he said gently. "Doc Warren's place ain't far now, just through that last rise." The forest opened up soon after, revealing a small cabin nestled beside a stream, smoke curling from the chimney. A gray horse grazed nearby its coat, shaggy with winter fur. As they approached, the front door creaked open, and a tall man stepped out, wiping his hands on a faded cloth. He wasn't dressed like any doctor Talia had ever seen, no coat or spectacles. Just a plain flannel shirt, suspenders, and a face lined with sun and time. Cale the man greeted with a smile. "You bring company." Cale stepped down and helped the girls out. "Doc, this here's Talia and Ayesha. Ayesha's been through more than most folks see in a lifetime. Thought maybe you could help." Doc Warren crouched a little to Ayesha's level, keeping a respectful distance. "Howdy, Miss Ayesha. I've got a dog named Smokey who thinks he's a person. He might bark at you, but he's all bluff, I promise." From inside came a muffled woof, followed by scratching at the door. Ayesha's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. "You can come in, or we can sit out here on the porch." "Up to you," Doc offered. Talia gave her sister a gentle nudge. "Want to see the dog?" Ayesha hesitated, then gave a small nod. Inside the cabin was warm and welcoming. A fire crackled in the hearth, and shelves lined the walls, books, odd-shaped stones, jars with labels in careful handwriting. Smokey, a grizzled mutt with mismatched eyes, ambled over and dropped a slobbery ball at Ayesha's feet. For the first time in days, she giggled. Doc Warren didn't rush. He let Ayesha pet Smokey, asked about her favorite color, her favorite food, what she dreamed about when she was little. When the questions turned deeper, how long they'd been walking, how many nights they'd gone hungry, he paused between each one, waiting to see if she'd answer. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. Talia sat nearby, her back straight, fingers twisting in her lap. "She's always been the quiet one," she said. "Even before we were left behind." Doc nodded, jotting notes on a pad. "Sometimes quiet means watching, feeling things deeper." "You did the right thing bringing her here." Talia lowered her gaze. "I don't know if I did anything right. I just ran." Doc leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "You ran toward something, not away. There's a difference, and that choice, that's what's keeping her alive." Outside, Cale waited near the porch, leaning against the rail with his hat pulled low. Miss Hattie had packed him biscuits and ham, and he'd barely touched them. He was used to fixing broken fences, rusted hinges, the occasional lost colt. But this felt like something he couldn't hammer or patch or shoot. When the door creaked open, he stood straighter. Talia stepped out first, her face unreadable. "She's still tired," she said, but she talked. "More than I expected." Doc followed her out and clapped a hand on Cale's shoulder. "She's strong. But that kind of pain leaves shadows. What she needs now is steady light, no surprises, no fear, just people who show up." Cale nodded, understanding more than he let on. "That we can do." They rode home slower this time. Ayesha dozed against Talia, her head bobbing with each rut in the road. Talia watched her brushing wind-blown hair from her cheek. She told him about the bruises, Talia said softly. Cale's jaw flexed, but he kept his voice even. "All of them." She said he got mad when she cried. Said it was her fault Mama died. She didn't want to make noise, didn't want to upset him. So she stopped talking. Cale didn't answer for a long time. Then finally he said, "The man who hurt you doesn't get to decide who you become." Talia blinked back tears. But how do you teach a child that you don't teach it? You show it. Every day. The ranch felt different when they returned warmer somehow. The horses in the corral whinnied at their arrival, and Miss Hattie came out wiping flour from her hands. Ayasha woke slowly, but when she saw the house, she smiled faintly. "Home," she whispered. Miss Hattie knelt and hugged her gently, but firmly. "Yes, child. That's what this is." Inside, dinner was already on the stove, and Cale started the fire while Talia settled Ayasha in a quilt. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the valley, but the hearth cast a golden glow across their faces. Later that evening, Cale sat out on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. Talia joined him, pulling her shawl tight. "You don't talk much about your past." He didn't look at her, but his voice came low and thoughtful. "Ain't much good in digging up old wounds. I've seen things, done things, some I ain't proud of. But helping you and that little girl, that's something I know I was meant to do." Talia sat beside him in silence for a while. "She said she wanted to learn how to ride," she said after a moment. Cale smiled faintly. "We'll start with a gentle mare. Something calm. She's still scared of the barn. She won't be forever." They sat together, the silence no longer heavy, just full of everything unspoken between them. And far off in the hills, unseen but not forgotten, another figure watched the valley, hunger in his eyes, bitterness in his veins. The road behind them wasn't as distant as they thought. She's not just healing from what happened, she's learning to trust again. Ayasha clung to the pommel of the saddle, her little hands tight her back, ramrod straight with nervousness. The sorrel mare under her was patient, barely moving, as if she sensed the delicate heart riding her back. Cale stood beside them with one hand on the reins, the other lightly on Ayasha's ankle. "You're doing fine," he said gently. "She won't run. Just breathe with her." Talia stood a few feet away, watching every twitch of her sister's body with her own chest too tight to breathe. Ayasha had asked to ride this morning, out of nowhere. She'd simply pointed at the horse paddock and said, "I want to try." And now here she was, perched, high eyes wide with fear and excitement. "Want to walk her a little?" Cale asked, his voice still low, like he was speaking to a wild foal. Ayasha gave a tiny nod. Cale clicked his tongue and led the mare forward at a slow, steady pace. Ayasha swayed slightly, gripped harder, but didn't panic. Her chin tipped up just a little. Talia pressed her hand to her chest, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. It wasn't just a child on a horse, it was the first time Ayasha had wanted something again. The first flicker of courage shining through the long, cold ash of fear. Cale glanced back at her and offered a nod. He saw it too. After a few more passes across the yard, he helped Ayasha down, and she ran straight into Talia's arms. "You were amazing," Talia whispered, lifting her up and spinning once before setting her down gently. Ayasha's cheeks flushed with pride. "I wasn't scared." Talia brushed hair from her face. "Even if you were a little, that's okay. Brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you did it anyway." Cale stepped back silent, letting them have the moment. He remembered words like that, soft ones his mother had used before life got hard, before the army, before he learned to carry everything in silence. "You'll have your own horse one day," Talia told Ayasha, kneeling in front of her. "One that knows your voice and comes when you call." "Can it be this one?" she whispered. Cale smiled. If you keep practicing, I think she'd be proud to call you hers. That night, as stars blinked over the hills and the fire cracked in the hearth, Talia sat beside Miss Hattie at the long wooden table. They peeled apples in silence, the rhythm comforting. I never thought she'd bounce back this fast, Talia admitted. Is it wrong to hope Miss Hattie handed her another apple? Hope ain't ever wrong. But healing don't move in straight lines. Some days you'll feel like you're moving forward, and the next day something will pull you back. Don't mean you lost the ground you gained. Just means the wound's deeper than it looks. Talia nodded her fingers, moving slowly. I still worry he'll come back, that he's out there watching. Miss Hattie looked up sharply. Has Cale said anything? No, and I haven't seen anything. It's just a feeling. Miss Hattie set her knife down. Well, honey, feelings are worth listening to. But you can't let them run your life. You've got a safe place now. You're not alone anymore. Talia's hand faltered, the apple slipping from her grip. I still don't know why Cale helped us. Why he keeps helping. Miss Hattie smiled softly. That man's been carrying more pain than most. You showed up with yours, and he saw himself in you. Maybe he's helping you heal because he doesn't know how to heal himself. Later, when Ayasha was asleep, Talia found Kalo in the barn brushing down the mare. The air was cool, scented with hay and leather and something earthy. She likes her, Talia said, leaning against the stall gate. Cale nodded without turning. They'll be good for each other. Talia stepped closer, her hands in her skirt pockets. I wanted to say thank you. For today. For everything. He finally turned, brushing straw from his shoulder. You don't need to thank me. I do. She paused. You said something before, that the man who hurt us doesn't get to decide who we become. I've been thinking about that. He waited, listening. I think I've been letting him decide for too long. How I talk, how I walk, how I trust. Her voice broke. I'm tired of being afraid. Cale nodded slowly. Fear's a cage. But you got the key now. They stood in the barn's hush, not needing to say more. The horses shifted in their stalls, a comforting sound of life going on. As Talia turned to leave, she hesitated. Miss Hattie said you've been through a lot, too. Cale's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shuddered. We all got our scars. She said you carry pain like a shadow. Talia hesitated. I just want you to know. You don't have to carry it alone. He didn't answer, but after she left, he stood in the barn for a long time, staring at nothing, the brush idle in his hand. The next morning, Talia woke to the sound of a horse galloping in the distance. She rushed to the window and saw Cale riding hard toward the tree line. Dust kicked up behind him. Her heart pounded. Ayasha stirred behind her. Where's he going? I don't know, Talia whispered. Minutes later, Miss Hattie came in, her face tight. One of the boys saw a man near the creek last night. Someone who didn't belong. Talia's blood ran cold. Cale's checking it out. Told me to keep everyone inside. But I'm not taking chances. Within the hour, Miss Hattie had rounded up 2 of the ranch hands to patrol the perimeter. Ayasha clung to Talia's leg, eyes wide. Is he coming back? She asked. Talia knelt. Kale, yes, he always comes back. But in her chest, a different kind of fear bloomed, one deeper than she'd known before. This wasn't just about healing anymore. This was about defending what they'd begun to build. And somewhere in the woods, just out of sight, a pair of eyes watched the ranch with cold fury. The past wasn't done with them. Not yet. She stared into the fire and whispered, if he's alive, then we're not safe. Not yet. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting soft, amber light across the room. Talia sat cross-legged on the braided rug, Ayasha curled beside her like a kitten head on her lap. Miss Hattie moved quietly in the kitchen, pouring warm milk into 2 tin cups, her face creased with concern. "I still haven't heard back from Cale," Talia said, her voice barely above a breath. "He's fine," Miss Hattie replied, but even her steady voice lacked its usual certainty. "That man's tougher than hickory. He'll be back." But if it was him, if Roy was at the creek, Talia didn't finish the thought. The name was enough to sour the room. Roy, the man who haunted their nights, whose temper had left bruises on skin and on souls. If he was truly back, everything they'd rebuilt might unravel. Ayasha stirred, whimpering in her sleep. Talia ran her hand gently through her sister's tangled hair, murmuring nonsense just to soothe her. The door creaked open a moment later, and they all turned. It wasn't Cale. It was Benji, one of the ranch hands. His boots were muddy and his breath ragged. "Miss Hattie. There's been movement near the East Ridge, tracks. Cale's horse came back alone." Talia stood quickly, her blood running cold. "What do you mean alone?" Benji removed his hat, eyes down. "Riderless, still saddled, dust and sweat all over her flanks. Something scared her bad." Miss Hattie crossed herself without thinking. "Get James. Tell him to take 2 others and head out with lanterns." Talia's voice cracked. "I'm coming too." "No, you're not," Miss Hattie said sharply. "You've got Ayasha to think about." Talia hesitated, glancing down at her sister, who now stirred, fully awake. "But Cale would tan all our hides if we let anything happen to you girls. Trust that he'd want you safe. We'll find him." Talia nodded, but her fists clenched at her sides. "If he's hurt," Miss Hattie placed a firm hand on her shoulder, "we'll bring him back." The search party left within minutes, fading into the trees like ghosts. Talia remained by the window long after they disappeared, her eyes searching for some movement, some sign. Hours passed. Ayasha drew quietly, her small frame tucked in a blanket near the fire. Talia paced, her stomach twisted with every creak of wood, every whisper of wind against the panes. Then finally, long after the moon had risen high, they heard the thudding of hooves. Talia rushed out onto the porch, barefoot, Miss Hattie close behind. James rode into the yard, lantern held high. And slumped over the front of his saddle, bloody, barely conscious, was Kyle. Talia's breath caught. They helped him down gently, laying him on a cot near the fire. Miss Hattie immediately went to work with salves and bandages, her hands steady even as her lips moved in prayer. "What happened?" Talia asked, crouched beside him. Cale's voice was rough. "Ambushed. He knew the land. Knew I'd come alone. Roy." The word didn't have to be said. "Did you see his face?" she asked, just his voice. That was enough. Cale's eyes opened, barely slits. "He said he'd be back. Said I stole what was his." Talia's breath hitched. "He's watching. He won't stop." Cale reached for her hand and squeezed weakly. "But you don't run. You don't let him win." "I won't," she said fiercely. "Not this time." Ayasha came forward, eyes wide. She didn't speak, just placed a worn, stuffed rabbit beside Cale's pillow and patted his shoulder with a child's gentleness. That night, no one slept. In the morning, Talia stepped outside and breathed in the cool air. The sky was overcast, and the hills were still. She felt the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders, but also the fire building in her chest. She wasn't going to live scared anymore. She found James in the barn and asked for his help. They reinforced the doors, the windows, made sure every lock was strong and every line of sight clear. Miss Hattie pulled out an old hunting rifle and placed it beside the front door. "If he thinks he's walking in here again," she muttered. He's got another thing coming. When Talia checked on Kale later, he was awake, sipping broth. You should have let someone come with you, she scolded. I didn't expect him to be that close. Talia sat beside him, her face pale but determined. He's not taking us back. Not with threats. Not with fear. Kale studied her. You're not the same woman who showed up here. No, she said softly. I'm not. And I'm not letting him break what we've started. Outside, Ayasha led the mare along the fence, talking to her, as if she understood every word. Her steps were lighter, her eyes brighter. Kale smiled faintly. She's healing. She's learning to trust again, Talia said, echoing his earlier words. We both are. That evening, while the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet, Talia sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the door. She wasn't sure when or how he'd come, but she knew he would. And this time she'd be ready. She stood between Roy's gun and her sister's scream and said, You'll have to go through me. The snow had fallen quietly the night before, covering the ranch in a hushed white blanket. The world seemed paused, held in a delicate balance between danger and peace. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the animals stirred only faintly in their pens, as if they too sensed the storm that hadn't yet come in the sky, but in the bones of those inside. Kale still lay resting his wounds, healing slowly beneath layers of salve and bandages. Talia had barely left his side for days, but now something in her gut told her she couldn't stay still. The quiet was too thick. It wasn't peace, it was warning. Ayasha helped Miss Hattie knead bread in the kitchen, the girl humming softly under her breath. Her cheeks had color again. She smiled easily. The shadows in her eyes hadn't gone, but they had begun to loosen their grip. That was what made the next moment so cruel. A knock came at the door. Not a light tap, not the familiar rap of one of the ranch hands, but a heavy, deliberate knock. One that made the walls seem smaller and the air thinner. Talia froze. Miss Hattie looked up, flour clinging to her apron. Don't answer it, she whispered, already reaching for the rifle by the hearth. Another knock. Talia stepped slowly toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. James. That you, she called. Silence. Then a voice. Familiar. Low. Oily. Talia. Her breath caught in her throat. Open the door, girl. Let's have ourselves a talk. Roy. She didn't move. Didn't blink. I've come to take back what's mine, he called again. Ain't nothing in that house belongs to you. Not the girl, not the man, not the peace. That's mine. Ayasha whimpered, backing behind the table. Talia's hands curled into fists. Miss Hattie motioned toward the back door. Take Ayasha. Go. But Talia didn't move. Instead, she reached for the rifle. Miss Hattie's eyes widened. Don't be foolish. He's not taking her. Not again. Kale groaned from the cot, trying to rise. His voice was raw. Talia, no. She turned to him, her eyes blazing. He nearly killed you. You want him to come back and finish it. A pause. Then he shook his head, once defeated. Be careful. Talia opened the door. Roy stood there wrapped in a thick coat, his beard longer, but the same venom sat behind his eyes. He smiled when he saw her. A wicked thing like a snake uncoiling. You look healthy, he said, stepping forward. Talia raised the rifle. Don't. He stopped. You won't shoot me, he said. You ain't got it in you. You don't know what I've got in me anymore, she said. Ayasha peeked around the corner and Roy's eyes found her. There's my little girl, he cooed. She's not yours, Talia snapped. She never was. She's not property. She's not a pawn. Roy took another step. She's mine by blood. Talia didn't lower the rifle. Blood doesn't give you the right to break someone. He laughed. You're talking mighty big for someone who used to flinch when I walked in a room. I'm not that girl anymore. He stepped again. Miss Hattie cocked her revolver behind him. I wouldn't try it, she said flatly, unless you want to leave with extra holes. Roy hesitated. That's when Ayasha screamed. It was the kind of scream that cracked through the soul part, memory part terror. He moved too fast toward the girl, and Talia didn't think. She moved in front of Ayasha, planting her boots in the hardwood and raising the rifle chest high. You'll have to go through me. He stopped inches away, breathing hard. His eyes danced with rage. Move. No. Behind her, Ayasha wept. Roy raised his hand, and in it a revolver. Miss Hattie fired. The sound split the room. Roy's hat flew off, and he stumbled, cursing as blood trickled down from a graze along his scalp. Next one won't miss, she said. Roy's fury exploded. He grabbed Talia by the collar, slamming her against the wall. The rifle clattered to the floor. Ayasha screamed again. Talia clawed at his arm, kicking, twisting the breath crushed from her lungs. Then the front door slammed open. James, and behind him, Cale. Barely standing, pale as snow, but eyes full of fire. Let her go. Roy turned just as Cale raised a rifle, one hand shaking but steady enough. Roy froze. Get out, Cal growled. You come back and I'll put you down like a rabid dog. Roy looked between them, Talia gasping for air, Ayasha sobbing in the corner, Miss Hattie gun still leveled, and Cale a man half dead, but still dangerous. He spat blood on the floor. This ain't over. Then he turned and fled, disappearing into the white, his boots crunching over new snow. The silence afterward was unbearable. The wind howled, the fire hissed. Talia collapsed to her knees, Ayasha crawling into her arms. Miss Hattie finally lowered her weapon, her hands trembling. Cale sagged against the doorframe, James catching him just in time. No one spoke for a long time. Later, when Cale was back in bed and Ayasha was asleep, curled against Talia, the house still hummed with tension. He'll come back, Talia whispered. I know, Cale said, but so will we. He left bruises when he stole her voice, but Talia's whisper tonight shook the whole house. No more running. He faces us now. The sky cracked with thunder, though no rain came. It was the kind of storm that brewed in silence, unsettling the bones more than the air. The snow outside had hardened to icy crusts, the kind that squeaked under boots and kept secrets in its silence. The ranch stood still, as though holding its breath. Inside, no one slept. Cale sat by the fire, his side wrapped and stitched, but his eyes far from restful. James polished a rifle in the corner, jaw tight. Miss Hattie shuffled quietly between stove and window, the hem of her dress brushing worn floorboards. Ayasha curled in the crook of Talia's lap, her fingers fisting the fabric of Talia's shawl like a lifeline. Talia sat still, hand resting on the girl's crown, her own eyes locked on nothing and everything at once. Roy's voice still echoed through the walls, even though he was gone. For now. Cale's hand trembled as he took a breath. He'll come back with more. Talia didn't look away from the fire. I know. James's voice was like steel grinding. We need to be ready. All of us. We've always been ready, Miss Hattie muttered, wiping her hands. What we haven't been is together. Talia finally turned her eyes to the group. Then we fix that now. James met her gaze. You got a plan? She hesitated. Then she nodded. Roy doesn't fight clean. He'll go around the front and back. He'll use what we care about against us. And he always makes sure you feel small before he strikes. Cale shifted his voice rough. Then we make sure he finds a different house than the one he remembers. Talia looked down at Ayasha, who stared up at her, silently mouthing a word of. Talia nodded and whispered, "He doesn't get to take another breath that hurts you." That was the moment the house changed. James gathered the ranch hands at dawn. Not many, just 3 left after Roy's men swept through weeks ago, but loyal, sharp-eyed men who remembered Talia's kindness when she first arrived. One had a limp from the same beating Roy once ordered. Another had been whipped for helping Ayasha escape the barn. They didn't need convincing. Cale showed them weak points in the fences the tree line Roy would come through. James mapped the rotations. Talia handed out the ammunition she'd hidden when Roy wasn't looking months before. "We hold him here," she said. "This time we decide the story." The sun never rose bright that day. It smeared through clouds like a whisper, faint and cold. The earth trembled beneath every hoofprint, every breath. Ayasha sat with Miss Hattie learning how to load shells. Her tiny fingers fumbled but steadied with every pass. The girl didn't speak, not out loud, but her eyes had a new sharpness to them, a readiness. By afternoon the traps were set, the men in position, the house sealed from within. Night crept in like a lie. They waited and waited, until a flicker on the ridge broke the stillness. Lanterns, 5, then 7. "Riders, they're coming." James whispered already at the window, rifle ready. Cale stood despite Talia's protests. He grunted through the pain, his expression carved from stone. "I face him this time," he said, standing. Talia didn't argue. She only stepped beside him. The riders stopped just outside the gate. One rode forward. Roy. He called out, lazy and cruel. "This house belongs to me. The girl belongs to me. I'm feeling mighty generous tonight, so I'll ask only once, bring her out, and no one gets hurt." No one moved. Then Talia stepped outside. The cold sliced at her wind, dragging strands of hair across her cheek, but her face was firm. "You left bruises when you stole her voice," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "But this is our land now. You are the trespasser, and we're done running." Roy's smile faltered. He pulled his coat tighter, signaling one of the men behind him. "Shoot if she moves." But before the rifleman could raise his weapon, a shot rang from the barn. "James." The man toppled from his horse. The standoff shattered. Roy cursed and ducked behind his mount, his men scrambling. 2 bolted back toward the trees. Another aimed for the porch, but a trap snapped beneath his horse, throwing the beast and rider into the snow. Talia ducked low, firing at a shadow crossing the fence. Inside, Miss Hattie had moved Ayasha to the cellar. The girl protested, tears on her cheeks, but Miss Hattie knelt to meet her eyes. "Sometimes the bravest thing a fighter does is wait," she said gently. Ayasha nodded and descended. Cale took position by the door, bracing his weight with the shotgun James left for him. He fired once, then twice, reloading with shaking fingers. The battle was chaos. Snow churned with blood and hooves, shouts echoing off the hills. Then silence. Roy was gone. His men scattered or dead. James returned, breath heaving. He fled toward the ravine. Talia turned toward the trees, heart thundering. "He's not done." "No," James agreed, reloading. "But neither are we. He can't outrun what he's done. Not this time. Not when we're finally strong enough to stand in the daylight and name him out loud." The early morning was carved out of silence. Pale frost coated the porch railings, and the sky, gray and tense, promised a sun that might never rise. Talia stood just beyond the doorway, boots anchored in packed snow rifle slung behind her shoulder. Her eyes followed the faint trail of hoofprints veering toward the ridge. Roy was out there somewhere, wounded in both pride and flesh, but not gone. Inside, James poured steaming water over grounds, the scent of coffee pulling the house awake. Kale sat with Ayasha on the floor near the stove, the little girl drawing wide circles with chalk on the wooden boards. Her voice had returned in fragments, soft, stuttering syllables, and though she didn't speak often, she no longer flinched when someone entered the room. Miss Hattie stirred oatmeal in a pot, watching the trail from the kitchen window like she could will justice down it. The air in the house wasn't calm, it was coiled. Everyone knew Roy wasn't done, but neither were they. Talia turned back into the house, eyes landing on James. "We need to finish it." James didn't ask what it meant. "We ready almost," she said, removing her coat and hanging it with practiced calm. "But there's something else first." She walked across the room, crouching in front of Ayasha. "Can you come with me, sweet girl?" she asked gently. "Just a little walk? You won't be cold, I promise." Ayasha hesitated. Then she nodded and took Talia's hand. They walked to the barn, the heavy door groaning as Talia opened it. The morning light filtered in as they stepped inside, where hay still lay scattered and the scent of horses lingered. Talia led Ayasha to the old tack room in the back, the one Roy had used to store tools and once fear. It wasn't just about letting Ayasha confront it. It was about reclaiming it. "This is the place you were locked in," Talia said softly, kneeling beside her. "You don't have to go inside. I just wanted you to see that it's yours now, not his." Ayasha stared at the doorway, her tiny hand tightening around Talia's fingers. "Mine," she asked the word rough but whole. Talia nodded. "He can't outrun what he's done. Not this time. Not when we're finally strong enough to stand in the daylight and name him out loud." Ayasha stepped forward slowly. She reached out, touched the wooden frame of the door, and whispered something so soft it melted into the dust. Then she turned, wrapped her arms around Talia's neck, and held on tight. They left the barn together, side by side. Back inside, James had spread out the map again. "He's smart, but he's also a creature of habit. He'll come through the pass. He always favored it when we hunted elk. Easier cover, and it curves around behind the ridge. If he has anyone left, they'll move through the timber just before dusk." Cale nodded. "That gives us time to do what Miss Hattie asked," folding her arms. "To bring the law." It was Talia who spoke, standing tall now beside the fireplace. "We've got everything we need. The girl's testimony, the ledger Miss Hattie kept of what Roy did here, the bruises, the injuries, the stolen cattle. This ranch wasn't just a place for his cruelty, it was a front. There's law in Billings that's been waiting to bring him in if someone would only stand long enough to testify." Cale looked at her, then nodded. "And now we do." Miss Hattie narrowed her eyes. "You're going to town, James and I," Talia said. "You and Cale keep the girls safe here." It was decided by noon. Talia packed the documents in a leather satchel, wrapped it tight, and rode out with James at her side. The trail to Billings cut through wind-scraped fields and pines dusted with snow. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the crunch of hooves and distant caws from ravens overhead. They reached the sheriff's office near sundown. A fire roared in the stove, and Sheriff Radley, a gray-bearded man with eyes like old iron, looked up from his desk. "Talia Walker," he said, voice low and dry. "I thought I'd be seeing you again one day." She set the satchel down. "I brought everything. He's back. And this time he's not just hurting women, he's building an army." Radley opened the ledger, scanning the careful entries. Names, dates, injuries, disappearances, payments taken, girls bought and discarded, and now Ayasha's name at the bottom, written in Talia's neat, firm handwriting. The sheriff nodded once. "We've waited long enough. I'll ride with you." 3 deputies and a pair of volunteer marshals joined them. Talia and James led them back by moonlight, the prairie a sea of silver beneath them. They rode hard through the night. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the girls curled into blankets, while Kyle and Miss Hattie kept watch. The traps were set again, but the quiet was louder than before. Cale sat on the porch, shotgun across his knees, eyes squinting toward the tree line. He didn't see the man until he stepped out of the shadows. Not Roy, but one of his last hired hands, dirt-streaked and thin as bone. "I come to warn you," he rasped. "He's got others. They ain't coming through the ridge. They're already here." A howl rose in the woods closer than anyone expected. Cale stood leveling his weapon. Behind him, Miss Hattie ushered the girls into the storm cellar, locking it tight. The house, like the land, held its breath. Justice was coming, yes. But before dawn broke, the past would rise one more time, wild-eyed and vicious, refusing to let go without a final fight. Some men are storms, but we learned to build shelter and fire, and stand through the worst of it together. The night cracked open with the sharp sound of gunfire. One shot, then two more in quick succession. Cale dropped low, heart-pounding, as the hired man who'd come to warn them slumped in the snow, blood blooming fast across his chest. A shadow broke from the tree line beyond, rifle raised and already moving again. Another figure darted behind the barn, and then another from the opposite flank. Miss Hattie's voice rang out from the back door. "They're trying to flank us," Cale fired once, the recoil jolting through his shoulder. A yell rang out, followed by a grunt, and then the crack of return fire. Glass shattered in the front window, shards scattering across the living room floor. Inside the storm cellar, Ayasha clung to Nora, both of them huddled together with blankets and a lantern. Miss Hattie had locked the heavy door from above, but the girls could still hear the chaos above the gunshots, the shouts and Cale's voice barking commands through clenched teeth. Miss Hattie returned fire from the side of the porch, the sharp report of her revolver echoing into the hills. One of the attackers screamed and fell against the woodpile. Another kept coming slow and methodical, using the fencing as cover. Cale ducked behind the porch rail, trying to catch sight of the man's boots. "Right there," Hattie whispered, leveling her pistol. The man dropped before he reached the barn. Silence, then the eerie sound of boots crunching in snow. Cale exhaled hard. "That's 4. Might be more hiding in the woods." He checked the chamber of his shotgun, then glanced at the ridge. "Where the hell is the sheriff?" Miles out under a bruised dawn, Talia led the charge toward home. The wind tore at her coat, and her horse labored against the frozen trail hooves, pounding rhythmically. James rode beside her, one eye on the horizon. Sheriff Radley and the deputies weren't far behind, rifles secured across their saddles, faces hard with resolve. Talia's jaw was tight, her thoughts not on herself, but on the girls, on Miss Hattie, and on Cale. She could feel the tension in the land itself, like it knew something terrible had crept in during the night. The smoke was faint, but visible by the time they crested the last ridge. "Fire," she murmured. "Damn it, they're under attack." No one needed orders. The group split as they galloped into the clearing, guns drawn. James veered left with 2 deputies circling the barn. Talia and Radley tore straight for the porch. Cale burst from behind the woodpile at the first sound of hooves, yelling, "It's Roy, he's here." From the barn's shadows came the man himself, limping, face smeared with dirt and blood. He held a rifle in one hand and a pistol in the other, but his eyes were wild and unsteady. Talia dismounted mid-stride, her boots hitting the ground hard as she ran for the porch. Roy spotted her and let out a growl, raising the pistol and firing wildly. The shot missed, ricocheting off the stone near the steps. James tackled him from the side, the rifle flying from Roy's hand as they hit the ground, rolling in the dirt and snow. Roy fought like a cornered animal, kicking and biting, landing a hard elbow into James's jaw. He scrambled up, only to find Talia standing 10 feet away, her rifle trained on his chest. "You don't belong here anymore," she said. "This land's not yours. These girls, my family, they're not yours. They never were." Roy spat in the snow. "You're weak, Talia. You always were." Miss Hattie appeared beside her revolver, cocked and steady. "No, boy. You mistook kindness for weakness. That's the last mistake you'll make." Sheriff Radley moved in, then placing heavy cuffs on Roy's wrists as he glared around at the circle of people, none of them trembling, none of them hiding. "You've got a lot to answer for," the sheriff said, tightening the restraints. "You'll be lucky if you see daylight again." Roy was hauled to his feet. He thrashed once, then slumped, breathing hard. Behind the barn, one of the deputies emerged, dragging the last straggler, another one of Roy's old hands. He was younger than the rest, eyes full of regret. "I didn't shoot," the young man stammered. "I thought we were just roughing folks up, not killing kids." Talia looked at him. "Then maybe it's time you figure out who you've been working for." The sun broke over the hills as they loaded Roy and the others into the wagons. Smoke still curled from a smoldering patch of hay, but the ranch held. The fences stood, the porch stood, and the people, they stood tallest of all. Back near the cellar, Miss Hattie opened the door. Nora emerged first, blinking up at the pale sky. Ayasha followed slowly, her hand clutched in Nora's. Cale dropped to one knee beside them. "It's over," he said softly. Ayasha glanced up at him. He's gone," he said, "and he's not coming back." The girls didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They just stood there, breathing the cold air and realizing they were safe for real this time. Inside the house, Talia laid her rifle down and sat beside the hearth. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. James joined her, sitting without speaking, just watching the flames. Cale came in last, nodding to her. "You did it," he said. "We all did," she replied. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Miss Hattie spoke from the doorway. "Some men are storms, but we learned to build shelter and fire and stand through the worst of it together." No one argued. The wind had died. And for the first time in years, the ranch was quiet. Truly quiet. You don't heal by pretending it didn't happen. You heal by remembering who you are without the pain. Winter lingered, clinging to the land like a long breath held too long. The snow had crusted over with ice, but the sky had softened. Days stretched a little longer. The wind held less bite. Life, cautious and quiet, crept back onto the ranch. Talia stood on the porch steps with her coffee cooling in her hands. She watched Ayasha and Nora build a crooked snowman under the old apple tree. They were arguing about whether the nose should be a carrot or a button. For the first time, their voices held no fear, just ordinary childhood squabbling. It filled the silence with something warm. Behind her, the screen door creaked, and James stepped out, pulling his coat close. "They're loud today," he said with a half-smile. Talia nodded. "They're not scared anymore." He sipped from his mug, then looked at her more seriously. "And you?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon where the ridge met the sky. "I think I'm just now remembering what it feels like to not live in defense of something." James stayed quiet, letting the moment breathe. "I'm headed into town this afternoon," he finally said. "Sheriff wants to go over the last of Roy's case files. There's still land disputes, accounts to settle. It'll take time." "Take Hattie with you," Talia said. "She'll know which records are real and which were just Roy's bluffs." James raised a brow. "You sure she needs to see it through?" she said. Closure matters. He nodded. And you? What will you do? I'm going to walk the fence line with Cale, fix the southeast section, and then... She paused, eyes softening. I'm going to go to the old cabin. James didn't ask why. He just touched the brim of his hat and stepped off the porch. By noon, Talia and Cale were walking the southern edge of the property. The sun glinted off the snow, and their boots left a clean trail along the fence. They worked mostly in silence, Cale hammering a new post into the frozen ground, while Talia tied the barbed wire in place. You ever think it'd be like this? He asked, not looking up. Talia tugged the wire tight. Like what you and me rebuilding things, not just the ranch. Ourselves. She gave a dry chuckle. I'm still figuring out who I am without Roy's shadow. He leaned on the post, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. You're the same woman who stepped in front of a gun for 2 little girls. That's who you are. She looked at him, not just hearing the words, but letting them settle. And you're the man who showed up and didn't flinch when it got ugly. They finished the repair and walked back slowly, side by side. When they reached the tree line, she paused. I'm going on alone from here. Cale frowned. To the cabin, she nodded. I have to. He didn't try to stop her. Be back before sunset. Snow's deep past the bend. I will. The cabin was farther than she remembered, its outline nestled beneath a grove of bare aspens. The roof sagged more than before, and one shutter hung askew, creaking in the wind. She stepped inside. It smelled of dust pine and old sorrow. The cot was still there, though the mattress had split open. The hearth held charred wood from a fire long gone out. In the corner, a small tin box rested under a collapsed rafter beam. She knelt beside it, lifting the lid. Inside were pieces of her. She thought she'd buried an old letter she'd written to herself, but never mailed a brooch her mother gave her before she died, and a tiny fabric rabbit Nora used to carry everywhere. She pressed the rabbit to her chest. This place had once been refuge, a hiding spot, a shameful secret too. The days she'd slept here after bruises, after silence, after stormy nights with nowhere else to go those days were etched into the wood. But now, standing here with the cold brushing her cheeks, she saw something else. Survival. You don't heal by pretending it didn't happen, she whispered. You heal by remembering who you are without the pain. She placed the rabbit back in the box, but took the letter with her. Back at the house, Hattie had returned from town with a leather satchel full of ledgers. She'd left it on the kitchen table untouched for now. Instead, she was humming by the stove, ladling stew into bowls. Nora set the table, giggling with Ayasha over something the horses had done in the barn. James came in, stomping snow from his boots, and nodded toward the hall. There's a letter for you, Talia. Arrived on the mail run. She took it with a small frown, breaking the seal. It was from the county office. Legal confirmation that Roy's land claims had been officially dissolved. What he hadn't mortgaged to pay off his debts was now in her name. All of it. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the brooch box near the hearth. Dinner was loud. Ayasha spilled her water, and Nora accidentally knocked over a candle stub. James tried to teach the girls how to butter rolls without crushing them. Miss Hattie told a story about her younger days working in a traveling medicine show. Cale laughed so hard at one point that he almost choked. Talia didn't say much. She just sat back and let the warmth fill her bones. Later that night, once the girls had gone to bed and the fire was low, she stepped out onto the porch again. Cale joined her. Fence held up good, he said. It did. You okay? She nodded. I'm thinking about starting a schoolhouse down in the old bunkhouse. Ayasha's ready. Nora too. You'll need help. She turned toward him. "You offering, I'm not going anywhere," he said. The wind shifted, but it was soft like a whisper, promising spring. Behind them, the ranch creaked and settled under the stars. And Talia, for the first time in a long time, felt whole.